actually welcome everybody to Orlando. We are actually from one of the close by universities, University of Central Florida, which right now is the second largest university in the nation with about 70,000 students. It's not something we take pride because it takes it's a difficult challenge to find a parking spot over there, but we are hoping that you're enjoying Central Florida. You get a chance after the conference, or hopefully maybe even before the conference, have gone to Disney or Universal, SeaWorld, or at least see a little bit around. We got up, pretty early. I live actually in Titusville, which is on the coast, and Madelyn lives in Winter Park, so we have to actually get up really early to be able to drive here. I had like an hour and a half to drive. How long did it take you to get here?
Oh, about 35 minutes.
Yeah, 35 minutes. Yeah.
But I would like to ask a question.
Sure.
How many of you have done interdisciplinary courses?
One, two, okay.
Oh, good. How many of you have done international collaborations with faculty in other countries? Oh, very good. Okay. And as Houman said, Mohammed's presentation really gave us a lot to think about, and we're really excited because a lot of what we're going to talk about is how we've implemented some of the recommendations that he made. So thank you for giving us such a perfect lead into what we're going to talk about.
Appreciate it. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start kind of personally because we're going to talk about what we've done and how we got to this point in our teaching, in our research, in our collaborations. And we've been working together on international projects since we met at a faculty summer development conference a long time ago.
You're not going to say how many years ago.
But what happened when we met was, and we're very fortunate because at our university there is a lot of support for interdisciplinary collaboration. I know that's not true at every university. But when we met, we found that although I teach technical communication, which is in an English department, and Houman teaches international relations, in a political science department. I'm Italian, and as you may know, we gesture a lot. When we talk, we gesture more than any other culture. And so we found that even though we had these differences, we had a lot of similarities in the way we approached teaching and what we felt was important to do in terms of preparing our students, both to be global citizens and for the workplace. So we started working together, and we started out by creating some interdisciplinary courses. And then that led to research together because, like most faculty members, when we started teaching courses, we decided that there was no good book for the course. So we created a book. We wrote a book on intercultural communication. And we actually had a lot of challenges in trying to get the book published because it was interdisciplinary. So a lot of times when you do things that are interdisciplinary, it's not easy, and we realize that, and that's something that we're going to talk about today. Okay.
Well, as Madelyn indicated, we could have asked for any better presentation before ours than Mohammed's, because one of his points in terms of recommendation was you have to create this environment that basically promotes internationalization, and awareness of globalization. So when we actually collaborated on the very first course, we created a course called Global Perspective. We actually did that one for our honors college because, as I mentioned, UCF is a very large school, but at the same time, they're trying to promote the spirit of a smaller school. So in honors college, then you usually choose, basically the cream of the crop. The class size is much smaller. The classes I teach, they're all about 100 students in each one, And in fact, after this, conference, I have to go back to grade like about 200-300, just midterm exam. All right. So, in the honors college, the classes are small. They can be interdisciplinary, and we did that one so well that right now, actually, my department has adopted that course as a part of it, like a cornerstone course for the global, and international studies, major, which is one of the majors we actually give. And she's absolutely right. we started actually working together into the Faculty Institute, which is one of the devices that in a different way Muhammad was suggesting, promoting faculty cooperation, because otherwise in a large school like that, how could somebody from Department of Political Science would meet somebody from, basically at that time, I think they used to call it just English, is that right? English department? You still call it? Yeah, because there were some split in her departments. So how would we would meet that? And that was a very good opportunity to actually meet somebody who has a similar interest and in terms of research, etc., etc. So that one started with first courses, then conference papers, and then publication, then eventually right now in terms of that intercultural book, which we've been asked actually to go for a second edition. So obviously the market over there, for those of you who are doing that type of work, the market over there is expanding, and those are opportunities for publication and growth.
And then the other thing that we're going to talk a bit about is we didn't just collaborate with one another. We reached out to other faculty across the disciplines at our university to collaborate with them. We've collaborated with colleagues from our School of Hospitality Management, our School of Communication, our Education Department, and so on. So we've worked with colleagues across the disciplines. Okay, so what we're thinking is, why don't more faculty engage in interdisciplinary collaboration? And as I mentioned before, sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy to get your work recognized. Sometimes it's challenging to find places to publish things if they're interdisciplinary. There are some really good interdisciplinary journals, but when we started out many years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. Also, in some schools, in some departments, it can be challenging. I know when we taught courses together, our chairs were very concerned, well, who gets credit? Who gets the FTEs for this course? Things like that.
Student credit hours.
Yeah. So that was challenging. Now, as I said, at our school, there is a lot of support in terms of getting faculty together, and our outgoing president created 5 goals. We just found out who our new president's going to be the other day, so that's exciting. But our current president created 5 goals for the university, and one of them was to engage in more interdisciplinary partnerships, and another was to internationalize the curriculum. So we're fortunate that there's at least an awareness of that on our campus. As you know, sometimes when there's awareness, that doesn't always mean that the support is there just because people are aware. But at least we had that. Another thing we thought might be the case for some faculty is that they might not really know how to begin or how to identify people to work with. Because one thing that has kind of driven our work recently is Houman mentioned how big the university is. In the last 2 years, we've hired 400 new faculty members. So we thought that some of our new colleagues might not have experience with internationalizing courses. So that was something also that was driving what we were doing.
Before we go, what I wanted to add is when Madelyn was talking about some of the challenges we had, sometimes we found, at least in our generation, maybe it's different right now for a newer faculty because it's more accepting, but in our generation, we noticed there was a gap, very clear gap between theory and practice. Everybody was talking about basically, promoting interdisciplinary studies, that would be really good, this and that. And then I got actually a talk, I remember when I was still as an assistant professor, I got a talk from my chair saying, well, Houman, this is very interesting, etc., etc., but you need to consider that, outside reviewers, they're going to look at you as a political scientist. You see what I mean? So from one side, the university is encouraging interdisciplinary studies. From the other side, I had to be concerned that, okay, if these articles are going to go over there, how are they going to look at that? Because we put a lot of effort into that. So that kind of goes along with the recommendation we were talking about. I think right now it's actually much easier because there are more journals. I think there's more of an understanding. The review committees in the department, in the college, at the university, a little bit more aware, but we had to actually face those problems. I do not know at what stage your university or college is, but this is just something to think about.
So what we're going to talk about is not just based on our own experience, but it's also based on research on globalization. We've read a lot about how faculty in other disciplines globalize courses. And then, as I mentioned before, we're also going to talk about our experience working with colleagues across the disciplines.
Right. Yeah, and as she has already mentioned, we didn't discriminate. We were interested basically in anybody who was interested in doing any kind of work with us, from basically engineering school all the way to hospitality, communication, some of my own colleagues. But sometimes it takes for people a little bit of an effort to think about, oh, okay, I already have this field that I know very well, the literature, etc., starting something new. Sometimes it's a good idea to talk with some of your colleagues that are maybe bored with whatever they are doing, and they are interested in adding something, and that sometimes helps a lot. Go ahead.
Excellent. So one thing we want to talk about is, how do you find someone with whom to collaborate? And maybe you won't have an opportunity like we do to meet with colleagues at a university-sponsored conference, but any opportunity you have to talk with colleagues from other disciplines, if you're serving on a committee. Unfortunately, I've served on a lot of committees this semester, and it takes a lot of time, of course, but one thing that I really enjoyed about it was I got to meet colleagues from other departments in my college that I would not normally meet or talk with. And that always leads to talking about what you're teaching and what you're doing, and then that leads to talking about things that you might actually end up doing together. Houman and I actually developed a series of assignments for globalization, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail about them, but I just wanted to give one example. We created a cultural interview assignment, and we're actually going to talk about that in our presentation this afternoon, or later this morning, sorry. But what we did was we offered it to colleagues across the disciplines, and we had a lot of colleagues in creative writing and history, all these people that were interested in using it, but then in reality we only had one colleague from the School of Hospitality Management who ended up actually implementing it in her courses, but that's led to a forthcoming publication. It's led to a lot of conference presentations. So, just talking to a lot of people, even if you only find one, that can be a success.
Yeah. And many times we notice that you need to really extend yourself, Sometimes we were thinking about, okay, we take one step, they take one step. Many times we have taken first, second, third, fourth, fifth step, And then, because some people are just very, very busy with, in academia, you focus, after teaching, you focus on your own research, publications. There's a lot of other things to do. So sometimes you have to extend yourself a little bit more, especially the further you go from your own department, But, it has actually worked out for us. And as Madelyn mentioned, we talked to a lot of people. From every 4 or 5 people, one of them eventually ends up doing a lot more work with us, and the result is actually very fulfilling because you feel like you're learning, from somebody else and some of their experience. Go ahead.
And so let's say you have found, like Houman and I found each other, we wanted to collaborate. The best way to start, we feel, is to find a way to do something together that draws on an assignment that you may already have in your course. And it worked well for us because I teach writing and Houman teaching international relations, so we found ways to have students write about particular and research certain topics. So that kind of was a natural combination. But I'm sure that that could be done in other disciplines. And one thing, my students who are going to be technical communicators, they're going to be working on teams with computer scientists, with engineers, with marketing specialists, with people in other disciplines. So when they have an opportunity to work with students in other disciplines, that's really great because that is actually preparing them for the workplace. That's preparing them for working with somebody who views knowledge and information from a different perspective.
And we are focused on assignments that have a practical, dimension. You probably noticed that the newer generation, they are, it doesn't matter female, male, they're a little bit more visually oriented, than our generation. And they're also focusing on the practical dimension of it. So many of the assignment we did was something that, for example, for one of the assignment for one of the classes, they put a website for local organization, or they had to go to local groups and get to know, what are internationally done here in Orlando. Because usually when you talk about something international, people, they think, oh, Washington, New York, maybe, San Francisco, bigger cities like that. But, we were basically able to let them know that there is a lot of international activities going on here in Orlando, just away from even the, the parks, theme parks or something. So that was a learning experience for them. For example, they associated with the UNA USA, World Trade Center, a lot of other places, and they actually did a pretty good job. We got very positive results.
So the next step, once we had found a way to collaborate on particular assignments, we decided we wanted to create an entire interdisciplinary course. And our advice for doing that is to give yourself plenty of time.
Right.
If you're going to do this, because there are a lot of things to consider. You need to think about what you want to cover and how you can meet goals and objectives for more than one discipline within a course. And we can talk about some of the examples from some of the courses we've done. Did you want to?
Yeah, sure. But before that, you also, leave a lot of time in terms of, when you're going to be working with somebody else from some other discipline that they have a completely different, systems and everything, you need to listen to each other, come up with some kind of compromises. Like, for example, many of Madelyn's classes are, of course, in terms of the size, they are smaller because there's a lot more intensive writing, assignments and everything. And then because of my classes are so large right now, they used to be that small, so large, I have to come up with, assignments in a way that I can actually process them. Because according to my girlfriend, I'm constantly grading, So, so that sometimes, if you want to put a successful course together that, the students are benefiting from, a multidisciplinary approach or something, you need to actually think about, how you're going to be assessing them and what type of, how you can compromise between the two of you in terms of what would be an appropriate way of assessing.
The other thing that we've both done that we found to be really satisfying and exciting is to work with international partners. And my experience has been working with two colleagues at the University of Limerick in Ireland and a colleague at the University Paris Diderot in France. And the way I found the colleagues in Ireland was I was at a conference that was held at their university. And before the conference, since of course I knew ahead of time that I was going, I contacted people there and, set up a time to meet with them during the conference. And I really had a desire to give my students an opportunity to collaborate with students in other cultures. And so we talked, and then we took a year and a half before we did our first collaboration. That was with the two colleagues in Ireland. And then subsequently, at another conference, we met a colleague who teaches translation. So the students in Ireland were studying technical communication like my students, and then the colleague in Paris was teaching her students to be translators. So we developed a project where my students and the students in Ireland wrote documents and the French students translated them, and they worked together in small teams. So every team had some US, some Irish, and some French students. And this was very effective because it involved having the students who were going to be translators work with the writers from the very beginning in developing the document. And that's the way it should be done. It's not always done that way, but that's the way it should be done in the workplace. So that was a very effective project.
Exactly. I think nowadays that is accepted, to promote interdisciplinary studies, collaborative type of activities among the faculty and everything. I think the deans like it, of course the chairs like it to a degree, the deans like it, the provosts like it, etc. But when they give all those speeches and everything, they black box everything. Like, for example, UCF is collaborating with so many different universities. We have this many MOUs, etc. But the bottom line is, when you do that one, you forget that the essence of, collaboration between two different universities is really goes back to the, collaboration between two faculty members from two different universities. That's what it is. And I think, what Madelyn, she gave you examples of some of our successes. Let me give you an example. I wouldn't say failure, but I would say challenges. Well, I had a State Department, when State Department was giving those grants, State Department University Partnership Grant, and I had one for Russia for like 3 years, to 2000 to 2003. And then what we did was we collaborated. We had the university president supporting us, even though there is like 6 hours, almost 6.5, 7 hours with that particular city in Russia, time difference. We were able to do teleconferencing, this and that, etc. But sometimes bad things happen. Is that right? Murphy's Law. The rector of the university died. Is that right? So suddenly the collaboration in that regard stopped. Then I started collaborating. So I'm telling you about the challenges because she talked already about the successes. The other collaboration we had was with the Ghent University, and the challenge we learned was, we were collaborating with some of their well-known, faculty members, etc., the senior colleagues, and the senior senior colleagues were passing the buck to the junior colleagues, Nothing wrong with that. We learn a whole lot about how some of the European universities, they function. And Ghent is very, very, obviously, high on the ground, very well respected. But we found out that the junior colleague, who was basically a PhD student, when he left, all those teleconferencing classes, they left as well with them. So it's very important, if you want to do that one with somebody outside, etc., you consider those factors. You, of course, need to have the support of the administrators. So, if there is funding required or something, to be there. But bottom line is actually collaboration between you and others. So we have both learned from that.
Yes, and that's what the research on virtual teams shows, is that the most successful collaborations are not, they don't succeed or fail based on the collaboration among students. They succeed or fail based on the collaboration among faculty members. That's in the research. That's not just our personal opinions. And then also, obviously, I was fortunate with Ireland and France that there is a time difference, but it's not a horrible time difference. Nobody has to get up in the middle of the night. But there are those kinds of challenges because we do like to have some real-time communication. We do a lot of things on Skype. And actually, my colleagues in Ireland and I did write a book on virtual teams that grew out of our collaboration. And another thing is technology. Whose technology do you use? Who's going to do tech support? Again, in my project, I was really fortunate because there were two colleagues in Ireland, and we used their university's online course system. So since there were two of them, it wasn't a terrific burden for them to take over dealing with the technology and setting up the student accounts and problems, troubleshooting, things like that. Whereas, that would be a lot for one person to handle on top of everything else. So those are other things that you need to consider. Okay, so what are some of the benefits to students from this type of collaboration? One thing that we want to get our students to do is to think outside of their own discipline, to understand that when they go out into the workplace or when they try to address global issues as active citizens, that they're going to have to come together with people who view the world, who view knowledge very differently than they do, and who may have a different language that they use to communicate about things. So that's something that they had to learn. Obviously, the intercultural awareness and sensitivity. The Irish and U.S. cultures, as you know, are not dramatically dissimilar. However, I had a really interesting experience the very first time my students collaborated with students in Ireland. My students were undergrads. The students in Ireland were graduate students. And one of my teams came to me at the beginning of the collaboration and said, "We're really worried about the Irish students. We don't think they're serious about the project." And I found that kind of strange since they were grad students, So I said, "Oh, well, why do you feel that way?" And they said, "Well, when we had our Skype conference, all they wanted to do at the start was talk about the weather in Florida and talk about what we did last night." And so I thought, well, okay, but obviously they were serious about the project, but they were engaging in social interaction. My students, typical American students, don't mean to stereotype, but this is true. We know this. Okay, you do this, I'll do that, you do that part, he'll do this part, and we'll get it done. And then maybe they'll think about, fun. So it was just a cultural difference, a very simple one.
But I like to, first of all, ditto what Madelyn said and say that this is actually true about faculty members too. I have been with teams of, some of our faculty members visiting other countries, like, for example, Russia, Japan, et cetera, and usually in those places there were, yes, there was some basic function, like welcoming ceremony or something that they had for us, but there was a lot of, getting to know each other, lunch, breakfast, and my, colleagues were complaining, they said, "Too many breakfast, lunch, why don't we finish the job and then after that go and start working?" So the focus is, just part of it is, I think, our American political culture in terms of let's get the job done first and then we are going to have fun. So that I can understand why students were concerned.
And of course, ideally, we would like our students to develop a framework not just for being successful in the workplace, but for being active global citizens. So we are going to hold all the questions until the end.
Right.
We did bring a copy of our book in case anyone is interested in taking a look at it. And we'd certainly be interested in feedback since we are going to be working on a second edition.